have the honor to introduce Marilyn for her presentation today on the integral city, recovering cities through rooms of peace. And it's actually the first day of our little talks and the first round of talks. So Marilyn is a pioneer for the conference. Marilyn Hamilton is also a founder of Integral City Meshworks and a co-founder of Living Cities Earth. She is the author of the Integral City book series. She designs and delivers Ubiquity University courses for Master of Regenerative Action. She has hosted Cities Rising for a Regenerative World for Humanity Rising, is the curator of Urban Hub 20 City Change in the VUCA world, and serves city ecoregions as Gaia's reflective organs. She works with Alternative Planet A, catalyzing citizen action networks, and through Compassionate Cities leads the monthly Island of Calm meditation for cities. Inspired by the Master Code of Care for Self, Others, Place, and Planet, she has served as a CEO, COO, CFO, and CIO in private and NFP sectors. She is an evolutionary leader, ambassador of World Unity Week, and a Findhorn Fellow and Urban Arena EU Fellow. Marilyn also lives in Findhorn, if you know it as the eco-village based in Scotland. And her session today is about the integral city and peace rooms. So integral city integrates and synthesizes the evolutionary dynamics of the city as the most complex human system yet created. Today's session will explore how 10 capacities of peace for integral cities have been broken, can be used to heal cities and contribute to the design for peace rooms. And I hand it over to you, Marilyn.
Thank you so much, Bibi, and welcome everyone. And I can say good morning, good afternoon, and I know even one person is a good evening in the middle of the evening. Yes, so welcome to this session. I'm going to start by sharing my screen and we'll get started with the presentation right away. So it is my honor to be a pioneer for IEC 2022 with this Recovering Cities Through Peace Room. And I'd like to start today by just giving us a minute so we could create some sacred space for Gaia's organs of peace. In Findhorn, it's our ritual just to hold a minute of silence when we're starting a session like this. So let me just ring you a chime to start, and then I will ring a chime when it's finished. Thank you. So our session today is going to take us through some of the ways that I have set out looking at an integral city. As Bibi said, I have been the author of the Integral City book series. And in these 3 books, I'm looking at care, context, and capacity building as patterns that show up in an integral city. And I wanted to look today at peace in the city and using these frameworks, show how it has actually been broken, but also how we can heal it and how we can perhaps create peace rooms. I will create the session so that's in 3 sets, and I will give you some time to reflect after each section, and I will invite you to use the chat to do that. And then at the end, we'll gather all of our reflections together and open up discussion across everyone who is in attendance. Please feel free not only to put reflections in the chat when the time comes up, but also to put questions. So let's start by looking at what is peace. I would say that peace is a condition or a quality that arises from human security. It's the result of feeling, acting, relating, and co-creating in a community that makes us feel fully alive. And I would say this aliveness is marked by resonance, coherence, and emergence with all life. The capacity of a living system is to survive, adapt, and regenerate under dynamic, unpredictable, and fluctuating, or VUCA conditions. The opportunity to feel happiness, comfort, and inspiration at the end of every day. So, guided by Gaia's evolutionary impulse, we can build capacity for peace when we honor the context and live what I call the Master Code of Care. The Master Code of Care says that we care for person, people, place, and planet all at once. And so, using this framework and the others, when threats to human security destroy peace, we can also use Gaia's wisdom to design approaches to heal and rebuild Gaia's living systems that she manifests through her human being. How can we imagine applying these principles to the horrors of war? A war that we are witnessing between Russia and Ukraine right now. I have pointed out in other writings that there is a way to look at security systems through an evolutionary framework. We live on a beautiful planet, and as beings, we are actually the recipients of the blessings and gifts of the evolutionary universe, solar system, lithosphere, hydrosphere, atmosphere, biosphere, anthroposphere, and our very civilization. When we ponder this stratification of elements, they challenge us to consider what would happen if any of them were threatened. And so I've also used the same framework to look at what I would call a convergence of ecosystem breakdowns. These breakdowns show us that they're really kind of stratified as well. And so these threats relate to the last 6 emergences, and I identify them as energy, water, climate, food, biogenetic ecology, and our psycho-cultural social civilization. It used to be that the costs of wars would be simply measured in terms of the loss of infrastructure, human life, and economic costs. But now we talk about the impacts of the Russian-Ukrainian war is not just on these, quote, traditional valuations of the costs of war, but we are beginning to realize that this war is impacting our access to energy in oil, gas, nuclear, to water, the Black Sea itself, food, oils, and grains, and that all of these elements are interconnected on all levels of planetary emergence. Likewise, the threats we have endured in the last 2 years of the pandemic are clearly biogenetic. While the IPCC's Code Red, their latest report, reminds us that climate change continues to impact our globe. So through a natural convergence, not a conspiracy, a natural convergence of Gaia's zones of emergence, we sit on the edge of a perfect storm of ecosystem breakdown. Integral City proposes that cities are Gaia's reflective organ. We learned this from James Lovelock, who considers that humans are Gaia's reflective organs, and I've translated that into saying that cities are the organs, our organizations are the organelles, and we individuals are the cells in these organs. Effectively, what happens to Gaia happens to us, to her organs. And so as those organs are being challenged, through the very qualities of life itself, failing to survive, failing to connect with our environment, and failing to regenerate our capacities, we are threatening ourselves as Gaia's expressions of consciousness. So I ask, how can integral cities learn from Gaia? Endowed as her organs of reflection, how can we imagine an ecology for the emergence of peace? What city capacities can we draw on to recover well-being at all scales of human existence for person, people, place, and planet? And in using the Russian-Ukrainian conflict as an example, I'd like to consider what is broken, and then how has Gaia herself been able to create conditions where we can heal? And then, if we can heal, what are the possibilities that we can use these frameworks to design a peace room? So let us consider first, what is broken? Firstly, I would say that cities as complex adaptive living systems have stopped using 5 sets of intelligences for surviving, adapting to our environments, and regenerating. We disregard the damage to individual citizens, organizations, and cities. The bombing of Mariupol to reduce it to rubble apparently targeted civilian residences, hospitals, schools, and the very basics of a civilized life. We have ignored the biomimicry lessons that reveal our cities are human hives. They have powerful, resilient collectives like the beehive is for bees. The military assaults of human habitats in the war acknowledged the importance of human life, but disregarded its value through the mass shootings of individuals and targeting women and children in refugee convoys. Thirdly, we're acting blind to the 4 realities that inspire our lives, and this denies our wholeness when we separate intentions, cultures, behaviors, and systems. The 4 realities reveal intentional misinformation, cultural propaganda to hate, inhuman actions like rape and torture, and systemic use of weapons to disable transportation routes through roads, bridges, airports. Fourthly, we are ignoring 4 ways of knowing, and this fragments our unity as multiple perspectives are disconnected from one another. Subjective from intersubjective, objective from interobjective, and all of them from one another. It would appear that the invading force acted under autocratic control that denied individual conscience, cultural history of intertwined Russian-Ukrainian stories, ethnic bonds through intermarried Russian-Ukrainian families, and combined infrastructures of pipelines, sea lanes, and the agricultural supply chains. Fifthly, not listening, being deaf to our 4 voices, prevents us from acting on the purpose of peace. In our human hives, we are disconnecting the 4 roles in the beehive: the citizen producers, the business innovators, the resource allocators, the inner judges. The 4 voices of the Russians were strategically misinformed via news and propaganda, thus disabling their intercommunication capacity. The 4 voices of the Ukrainians were damaged by the 5 million citizens who have exited the country as refugees, leaving behind a further 7.5 million people who have been displaced within the Ukraine. The majority of Ukrainian voices were diverted from their usual peacetime occupations into military roles in defense of the country. Thus, in both countries, the 4 voices were serving the purpose of war rather than the purpose of peace. Sixthly, regressing species development from the possibilities of cooperation and collaboration into mere competition or authoritarianism blocks the emergence of peace. The war conditions ironically demonstrated the more complex stages of cooperation and collaboration amongst the Ukrainians who fought for the value of freedom and democracy. Meanwhile, the Russian nation was reduced and rewarded only for service to the attacking of its neighbor, wasting Russian resources for generations. In further irony, the Russian oligarchs were targeted by the EU and Western democracies to reduce their influence and recover their resources for the rest of the world, supporting Ukraine through delivery of weapons, ammunition, and training. Number 7, we're preventing city growth through steps and stages, and this severs the flows that support the development of the capacities for peace. While the war continues, no growth is possible. In fact, the war has impacted the evolutionary trajectory and set it back into less complex stages of complexity, possibly for generations to come. Next, we're forgetting the Master Code of Care, and that shrinks our circles of compassion. I know some Russians in the diaspora in the rest of the world have been able to demonstrate compassion for those involved in the conflict, including the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians have been reduced to care for self and their immediate families and countrymen and women, while desperately trying to live as their human habitats, cities, towns, and villages have been assaulted. The Master Code of Care has been seriously injured, even while the rest of the world assimilates the impact of refugee migration. In 9th place, I would say, we're weaponizing human security, and this mechanizes human disconnectedness and creates deserts of peace. This most fundamental assumption of daily life, that safety and security is fundamental to all human endeavors, has been transgressed by the attackers and the cause of the fear in the victims. And then 10thly, I would say that traumatizing the 4 voices of community prevents the emergence of a third side, which is what William Ury describes the possibility of 4 voices acting together. So by preventing this, it means that any of the issues and the capacities to engage what is blocking healing through pain, injustice, conflict, pollution, and degradation is ongoing. And the impact of the Russian-Ukrainian war will last generations as it derives from unhealed traumas from previous wars and conflicts. The great wounds of distrust and disrespect have damaged both victims and aggressors. Rescuers, rebels, witnesses cannot be effective while the conflict continues. So I would like to pause here and give you a chance to reflect, to make any comments that you would like to put into the chat, and we'll gather those up afterwards. You may just like to sit quietly and reflect. I'll give us a minute, and then I'll start the slides again. So thank you for your reflections, and now I will continue with the slides. So now that we've considered what is blocking and preventing peace, let's now look at what are the ways that we might use these same 10 city capacities to heal. And I want to say that in using these 10 capacities, I think they are all able to contribute. But if we want to heal, we would use them in a different sequence. And so here's the sequence and some comments on each of them. So I would start fundamentally with the practice of the Master Code of Care to expand our circles of compassion. A fundamental place to start is here because it provides an ethic for peace, a theory of change, and a practice to calm the inflamed and damaged system. Next, I would move to nurturing human security as an ecology for peace. Recognizing that safety and security is a human right that is fundamental to every stage of development and manifestation of human habitat will depend on the Master Code of Care, but it must be held by trusted others who have not been party to the conflict on either side. Safety and security must start small with individuals and families and embrace the city block by block. This can be tied into the next step of creating a peace and conflict restoration process, something like a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So the third way to heal, I say, is to manage peace and conflict with the four voices as community, acting, as William Ury says, as a third side, able to engage any issue and heal trauma, pain, injustice, conflict, pollution, degradation. In this stage, the four voices of community must be found, first of all, and strengthened so that they can have the courage to engage issues, damages, and injuries in any of the four areas of reality: bio, psycho, cultural, infrastructure systems. They will likely need strong representatives from other cities. That would be the +1 that I speak to in the 4+1 voices. They will likely need strong representatives from other cities who can come in and incubate assemblies for recovery and reconciliation. Fourthly, and this is where the sequence now resumes with the ones that I spoke about under the broken condition. In fourth place of healing, I would say, recognize cities as complex adaptive living systems with the 5 sets of intelligences for surviving, adapting, and regenerating our environment. Cities must be honored as living systems who have intelligences at all scales, from individual to collective to organizations, neighborhoods, communities, and are embedded in bioregions. They need to use the contexting and strategic intelligences guided by the evolutionary impulse of the master code of care. Next, I would learn the biomimicry lessons that reveal our cities are human hives, powerful, resilient collectives like the beehive is for bees. When we look at regenerating cities as human hives, we will consider not only the rehabilitation of bricks and mortar, which is usually the place where healing starts, but we will look at the lives of individuals, relationships, and purposes and values embedded at every scale of the city. Looking at how nature can recover from natural disasters can give us inspiration and impetus to learn how best to be effective in our recovery efforts. Next, we would coexist with our four realities and let them inspire our lives as they tetra arise through our intentions, cultures, behaviors, and systems. We can use these four realities to look for early wins to build capacities for recovery. This will include individual cities and the people and organizations from the rest of the world, always keeping in mind to embrace the four realities as co-arising, coexisting dimensions that enable us to be most impactful and should be based on the strata of need. Next, we would empower the four ways of knowing through multiple perspectives, through subjective, intersubjective, objective, and interobjective. We can empower people's recovery by using four approaches for epistemology, for strategic design that embrace all our senses, our intelligences, response abilities in the four quadrants. We would bring in specialists for each of these quadrants and work as recovery teams, cooperating and collaborating with locals. Next, we would serve the purpose of peace with the four voices in our human hives, like the four roles in the beehive, where we see citizen producers, where we see business innovators as diversity generators, civic managers as resource allocators, third sector inner judges, and we would recognize that other cities are not our competitors, but would be helping us in many different ways. So we would make room for the activities of all four voices to serve peace as we rebuild capacities. And we would keep peace as an integrating, uniting purpose in service to planet, place, people, and person. Next, we would recognize that we are a maturing species and that we must move beyond competition and into the stages of cooperation and collaboration. In other words, peace. It's very difficult to cooperate and collaborate without peace. We help the city systems discover the resources that they can contribute, how their needs are being met, and create the life conditions for recovery to emerge. We would need to meet them where they are at and help them regrow full, healthy capacities for living, the surviving, connecting with the environment, and regenerating, which are the conditions of living systems. And lastly, we would grow our cities through steps and stages that scale the capacity for peace. So we are mindful of Gaia's stratified elements and capacities, and we would have to design a journey for peace that respects and recovers how life depends on life in an ecosystem of peace. We would help each city design its own steps and stages and link individual cities to others in their bioregions so they can help each other. So I'd like now to give you another minute or two to pause and reflect on what I have shared with you about healing cities. We'll take another minute, and please put your comments or your questions in the chat. So thank you for your reflections, and feel free to add more as we go along. And I'll return us to the slide. And so now I'm going to consider how the 10 city capacities might contribute to designing something that I'm calling a peace room. And I'm going to thank Barbara Marx Hubbard for the idea of a peace room. That's where I first heard about it. And this was something when she was running for vice president of the United States, that she suggested that we didn't need war rooms. What we needed was peace rooms. And as I was considering what I wanted to say for this session, I remembered Barbara's suggestion. And so I just like to bring our reflections and comments to focus on what a peace room might do. Now, those of you who have the spiral dynamics background will recognize the term vital signs monitor. So I thought that if we went back to look at what is peace, we might look at what would be the vital signs that we would monitor in a peace room. So we would look at peace as a condition or a quality that arises from human security. That it's the result of feeling, acting, relating, and co-creating in a community that makes us feel fully alive. We would recognize this aliveness is marked by resonance, coherence, and emergence with all life. And that the capacity of a living system to survive, adapt, and regenerate under dynamic, unpredictable, and fluctuating, or VUCA conditions, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And finally, the opportunity to feel happiness, comfort, and inspiration at the end of every day. What if we set out to monitor those conditions in a peace room? Furthermore, in a peace room, I think that we could use the maps that we've developed for integral city frameworks, and they would look at individual performance, collective coordination, cooperation, and collaboration. They would look at place caring and placemaking, and planetary and global participation. So here are the maps, and you can recognize, I'm not going into them in detail, but these are some of the things that I teach in our courses. So we would pick up the map 1, which is a very integral map of the 4 quadrants at multiple levels with the evolutionary impulse in the center, and we would look at individual performance. Map 2 looks at the collective and cooperation and collaboration, and we can recognize the nesting of the individual families, groups, organizations such as workplaces, education, healthcare, communities, cities, and ecoregion, all, of course, in the context of Earth. Map 3, I think of as place caring and placemaking, where we see that individuals develop, are able to work in clusters like teams and groups or families, and together they are part of organizations, agencies, and altogether they are part of cities and part of communities and cities. And the place caring comes from thinking about how do we do this as a we, and the placemaking is focusing on the behaviors and the structures in the city. So we would have consciousness and culture and the behaviors, actions, and structures working together as place caring and placemaking. In map 4, we'll recognize here the evolutionary path of the kinds of organizations that we have developed across our evolutionary history in different cultures. They look different in different cultures, are named differently in different cultures, but essentially they become more and more complex as we evolve. And they are all alive and functioning today. And I find them all alive and functioning in any city that I look at. But for the purposes of a peace room, we would be looking at how are they functioning within our cities and within our bioregions and across the planet. So we could use this map for planetary participation. And there is a map 5 as well. And this is to look at the involutionary and evolutionary principles in practice that bring us connecting to our source and evolving through the gross, subtle, and causal fields back to source, embedded in a context of love. So to be conscious of these qualities that hold our cities, I think would make for a very powerful set of maps that would be part of a natural peace room. So I see that in this peace room, cities would be acting truly as Gaia's organs of peace. And in our peace rooms, we would be creating legacies for our future generation. Now, I also naturally, for those of you who know me, would think of in a peace room, we would have a curriculum of some kind. And I think that we could base it on something like what I've called a Manifesto of Peace. And this Manifesto of Peace honors the universal values in all life. I've given it 4 Ps: person, people, place, and planet, which you'll recognize come from the Master Code of Care. So let's just look at what would be in this curriculum. We would teach people how to protect our individual needs for physical and spiritual safety and survival, and prevent harm to all individuals so that we may serve all of person, people, place, and planet. We would honor the traditions and heritage of the elders and each group of persons, so long as they do not threaten the health of person, people, place, and planet. Our curriculum would teach how to defend the freedom of each individual to express their agency, development, and creativity without infringing on the freedom of others to express their agency, development, and creativity, so that we may serve all of person, people, place, and planet. We would respect the value of order without imposing restrictions that harm individuals or groups, and honor the need for order that serves the entire system of person, people, place, and planet. We would promote the success of person to publicly recognize the origination or originator of ideas, products, and services, to be accountable for the integral and fair exchange of products, services, and ideas, as long as resources do not accumulate for the benefit of a few interests, organizations, and/or levels of development at the expense of, or while depriving resources to person, people, place, and planet. We would accept the dignity of groups to ensure fair opportunity for all persons to pursue happiness, as long as no individual or group is prevented from doing likewise. To not discriminate on the basis of race, sex, gender, creed, and not to favor any group at the expense of another group, as long as such action ensures the health of person, people, place, and planet. We would learn how to facilitate the integral flex and flow of energy across all aspects of the Gaia's ecosystems, to unblock the barriers to the emergence of new ways of thinking, doing, being, as long as they respect the health of all life, to mesh the elegance of natural patterns, processes, and structures across person, people, place, and planet. And lastly, to value the geo-bio-noetic capacities of the planet, to respect the integral ecology of person, people, place, and planet, to co-emerge the evolutionary intelligence of life inherent in person, people, place, and planet. And so with such a manifesto of peace, possibly providing a curriculum for the Peace Room, I just invite you to reflect on that. And I'll just leave that slide up for a minute as you have this reflection. And then we'll gather our reflections and have our own reflections in this room of peace. Thank you for your reflections, both written and held in your heart, and may be expressed as we have our exchange. Before we do that, I'd like to share something with you that's very dear to us in Findhorn. It's a Gaelic blessing, and then I'm going to give you a final blessing from this room of peace. So our Gaelic blessing is one that you may have heard. Deep peace of the running wave to you. Deep peace of the flowing air to you. Deep peace of the silent stars to you. Deep peace of the quiet earth to you. And so I would like to add from our room of peace a blessing for cities of peace. Deep peace of the evolutionary flow to you. Deep peace of the living hive to you. Deep peace of the city's voice to you. And deep peace of the master code to you. Thank you. So thank you, everyone. I would like to take a minute and have a look at the chat. And I would also invite Bibi to guide me to anything that she's noticed that maybe I could address first. But I'd like to thank you for your reflections and your question. Thank you so much. And so I'm actually going to invite the person who's put the comment in the chat to maybe speak it out. And so I would invite Aliyah first, because you had the comment about the aggressor. Would you like to make that comment and open that up for discussion, Aliyah?
Oh, yeah, just for discussion. Let me find it first.
If you can't find it, I can read it out.
Yeah, it would be great if we had accurate information about what the aggressor actually wants, that it couldn't get peacefully. War is a means to an end, and peace is more possible when war doesn't become the means of choice.
Mm-hmm.
Just to stimulate reflection.
Yeah, so have you seen, can you think of a particular example of this that strikes you as maybe creating a curiosity about what the person couldn't get or the group or nation couldn't get peacefully?
Well, I think you alluded to the long-term context and the long-term causes. I would look there. But I don't know. I don't have any accurate information.
Thank you. Anybody else have any comments or reflections on Aliyah's observation? If you do, just raise your hand and we'll unmute you. All right. Can people unmute themselves, Bibi? Oh, Nicola, go ahead.
Thanks a lot, Marilyn, for your presentation. I mentioned in last comment and question, and what about Alia mentioned what we know what aggressor really want. First of all, in this concrete situation, we have some text from this state of aggressor, I mean Russian Federation, the official representative of this country written some text with purpose Ukraine as country, as nation does not exist. It about I understand they want that I not exist, that I'll kill, I'll die. Yes. What we deal in this situation when we have some country then want the official representative of this country want to don't exist is not exist other country is. It about tradition. You mentioned about tradition, but what we can deal is this tradition of cannibalism, for example, tradition dictatorship, tradition of war. Because in case of Russian Federation, we have cult is cult of the so-called victory, победа.
Yeah.
It about. We as winner have a lot rights and other doesn't this
Yes.
rights.
Mykola, could I ask you what is your background and where you are right now? I'm just curious. You're on mute.
I'm from Kiev, Ukraine, and cultural anthropologist.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah,
because I observed it historically.
Yes. So I think those are really great observations, both from Alia and Mykola. And I don't have a pat answer, but I think the process that I would invoke would come from William Ury. And I think that William's idea of calling together a third side can be used at any fractal scale. And the larger the aggressor, the more challenging it is. I know that the United Nations was created in some respects to try and do this. And William works with the United Nations, but until and unless we have a third side that is willing to, at least attempt to call all parties to the table and find both ways to both heal those who have been victims and also to dare to open the doors of the whole ancestral line of trauma creation, then I think that we're actually going to probably stay in a challenging place as a human species. I don't think that where we are as an evolutionary stage in the human species is easy, and that we're going to have to learn our way through it. Unfortunately, we can see very visibly now what the costs of war are in the process of doing that. So personally, I'm hopeful that such visibility will incent us to actually commit to doing something much more effective in calling a third side together. Lyda, did you have anything that you wanted to comment on this, or did you have another question or comment?
No, I like to continue with this question of Alia.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. So yesterday also someone said we need to know the history, and I think it's really true. I realized that I know nothing about Russia. In fact, yeah, something, or about Ukraine. And now I'm diving in the history. books, in literature, and it's revealing a whole new world and about thinking about what happened already for thousands of years, and that you can see now again back in what is happening. So I think to know what the aggressor wants, the first thing I think is to go into the history. And yeah, I think that's really a missing link in the West. It's not only me, I think it's broader, also politicians and so on, they don't know. And they make, let's say, strategies without knowing.
Yes. So that's an interesting comment, Lyda. And I think that's one thing I also feel very humble about. What is it that I know and don't know? So being able to even use the 4 frames of the different ways of knowing, as well as different realities, I think is really important. And this whole evolution of our ancestors, everybody on the screen has survived. So we have, all of us, ancestors who have enabled that to happen today. So that's sort of the evidence of the surviving, connecting with our environment, whatever that is, and being able to regenerate. However, to do it wisely, I think if the third side can do anything, the first thing they would have to do probably is stop the conflict before we can allow all the voices in the room to be heard. I don't think the West has a monopoly on not knowing history. And I do know that epistemologically, one of the reasons I use something like systemic constellation work is to be able to see the invisible in the system. So I learned a long time ago when I was invited to take these kind of frameworks to a city, I was concerned, what right did I have to go in and make any observations? And so it was at that point in time that I started to use systemic constellation work to be able to gain some access to the invisible and to the ancestors. So I found that was also very valuable. And that work is, based very much on in the wisdoms of indigenous peoples in Africa. So I think we have lots to learn from them. Thank you, Lyda. John.
Thank you, Marilyn. I love that you mentioned constellations, and I loved your manifesto too. I mean, we have to be able to deal with problems like this in multiple dimensions at the same time. The one that I wanted to talk about was to get behind something which is, I think, fundamental, kind of built into the spiral, about how I see Alia's question and the position of somebody like Putin is he's just an example of a generality that we have a history of in many cases electing people whose motivation is power, and who have kind of or whatever damage within their own personalities and psyches that may put them in that way of being. Equally, I mean, there are many places in which people take power, whether they're given it or not, but driven by the same or similar impulses. So there's a combination of the history that is kind of present and invisible in the collective, in the way that you would, bring out in the constellation, and then there's the individual deep trauma going back through family, through generations, that would come out through a personal constellation. And these things they interact, and they're all important. I think the thing that I'm concerned that we don't miss from this conversation about peace is the fact that we have always, as human beings, dealt with this tension of peace in the future at the expense of war today. And we don't at the moment have a mechanism for containing what I'll simply describe as red aggression at the time that it's happening, or we're kind of, for all sorts of good or bad reasons, we're the world is deliberately avoiding actively containing the red aggression. It's doing so by support of Ukraine or by indirect means like financial, but we're at a very unusual position in respect of how we're dealing with the existence of a war and what the collective is choosing to do about that. And the thing I put in the comment was the perspective that the long-term shift has to be a shift from top down to bottom up. And I think, cities, in the way you've presented them, sit very beautifully in the middle of a bottom up, an articulation perhaps of a bottom up emergence of how people can shift the balance and stop allowing or electing people into positions of power. But we have a tension right now over, the damage that's currently being done.
Yeah, those are great observations, John, and I would agree with them. And that as our species is had an evolutionary stage of not having been able to figure out how to do the things that you're pointing to, I'm reminded of something that Aliyah sent me a couple weeks ago about a group who was basically commenting on the rest of the galaxy, the rest of the universe. Any successful life system had, first of all, eventually, at any rate, come to value its planet, its home base, above all else, and that being in service to that allowed all of the other decisions to more or less be aligned. And I would say that much of our war history is very localized. And we even keep that sort of in our frameworks when we report out and we see it in the media. And I think that our mediation, our media coverage of our wars still goes with, if it bleeds, it leads. And so we're fed day after day after day the stories of the conflict, and we're not fed or find it difficult to look for acts of conciliation or peace. And I feel that you're right. Of course, I have had a bias for thinking about cities for a long time. I do think that cities are the place where it's most likely that we can do a bottom-up emergence where people, as I said, block by block, actually are going to have to rebuild these cities that we've so badly damaged. Yeah, so there's so many dynamics going on. So one of the nice things about an integral frame is being able to somehow hold it as a whole and be able to use those maps for a peace room and see where is peace not being enabled, where is peace being challenged, where is it not possible at all at the moment. And this is where some of the wisdom from the spiral can be used too, because not all acts of aggression are the same, and not all of them require the same response. So we need to even embrace a whole different way of being able to recognize what's challenging our existence and the existence of the planet right now, because we're able to scale it that high. Thank you, John. Valerie, you've had some interesting comments in the chat. Go ahead. Oh, there you are.
Thank you very much, Marilyn. First, I would like to answer the question: what aggressor needs, what aggressor wants that he could not get by peaceful way. It's really hard to say when the aggressor kills civilians, children, women, rape women and children, what really he get that he could not get in peaceful way. And here I think I can answer with a quotation which I put in chat, that we intend to remain alive and our neighbors want to see us dead. And this is not a question that leaves much room to compromise, which said Golda Meir once. And I think that the major issue which we lose sometimes is that we are all very nice integralists, thinking about everything in terms of AQ, AL, or equal. And when we're thinking and speaking about the war, we fail as integralists. We see this just in one level, just in one quadrant. We consider this only in, let's say, right upper quadrant and green level. War is bad, peace is good. Maybe we take upper left and say about forgiveness and so on. But we forget about all other levels and all other quadrants, which provide us with the answer what aggressor wants, why the war began, and so on and so on. Let us see that this is not a Putin's war. This is a war of a system against a system. And there are so many reasons inside Russia and outside Russia which create this war. I will give you just a few examples. I have my list is a list of 10. I don't want to waste your time, but just to say, last 20 years, especially last 12 years, Putin installed in Russia the more and more archaic economic, social, religious, cultural systems. This is lower right. And under the pressure of these systems, so he moved economy to a tyrannic economy when everything belongs to the state. He moved religion to from Christianity to something which is not a Christianity according to Orthodox major Orthodox cathedrals of the church. He moved culture into the first into the Stalinism, then into the more and more archaic heroes like Ivan the Terrible and so on. And so on. So when all quadrants degrade, I call this integral degradation. When you go to more and more archaic system, human capital degrade as well. Yeah. People became savages and barbarians, and indeed, when they see something else, they simply kill. So this doesn't mean that they are not guilty; they are guilty, but system is guilty as well, and we forgot about that. And then take another reason outside.
Excuse me for interrupting, Valerie. I think you're making very acute comments. And I'd like to ask the same question of you, where I should have asked everybody to rename themselves and put their locations. And
okay. I'm from Kiev, Ukraine.
Okay, also from Kiev.
And thank you for that. And I am not far from. I'm living not far from those small neighborhoods which were a symbol of Ukrainian very successful middle class, and now they are symbols of war crimes like Irpin, Bucha, Hostomel, and so on.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying in the first frame that you gave is that there has been, from your perspective, some intentional maybe down complexing of the Russian system in all four quadrants.
Exactly.
And so it's a bit like saying integral is a very powerful tool like fire. Fire can cook for us. It can heat us. It can be used for very good systems. The whole integral framework can be used for design of all kinds, not only beneficent, but also somebody who wants to use it for other purposes. And a number of the comments, either in the chat or that have been made, have related to power. So as a human species, we're also wrestling very much with what is the impact of power. And we've seen over the last century and up till now, how the different nations have recalibrated their impact of power. And we're now seeing and able to see on a daily basis the impacts of it in ways that were hidden before. The invisible has become visible because of our media. So I also think the media is very direct. It's not mediated just through the big broadcasters, but directly person to person because of the social media that allows us to tell the stories. Here in Findhorn, for example, we do have a Ukrainian refugee, and we're working on getting some more people to come here. And I was speaking to the host of one of those refugees, and she says, the person is doing a relatively good day, but then at the end of every day, she can still get a direct report from her village in the Ukraine. And it's a terrible, terrible reality to live something that connects you back to your family and friends and your place of origin. So, you know, when I talk about people, I talk about person, people, place, and planet, that karma yoga of the master code, I invoke it that we make decisions on all 4 levels. But if it's invoked for intentions that are not beneficent, it can be very, very powerful. And I think that we as a species are trying to figure out, are going to have to, if we haven't framed on it, focused on it, how we can live that way. So that's just a comment to your first comment, Valerie. Go ahead with the next one.
Thank you very much, Marilyn. And just to finish, I'd like to come back to your brilliant presentation and say that first Putin had to destroy Russian cities, which introducing and installing all those disbalances and failures and fallings and shortcomings which you mentioned, to create the tension, to create the entropy, which led him to push then people which degrade to savages into other countries. I'm speaking not only about Ukraine now, but also about European countries like Georgia and Moldova, which also were targets for aggression. So first he destroyed his own Russian cities to create prerequisites to start destroying other cities. And this is first signals. I'm speaking now about preventing the next war. We should see signals how autocratic leaders destroy their own integral cities. Because this is the first signal that then other cities of neighbor countries, or maybe not only neighbor countries, as far as we saw yesterday, a cartoon on Russian TV, how Russia intends to destroy United Kingdom by nuclear weapon. And this is not a joke. This is a plan. Then go to destroy other cities. And just to finish about indigenous people, I have to mention that indeed there are indigenous people in Russia and Ukraine, both, not only Slavic people like Ukrainians. Ukrainians live here for more than 15 centuries, but take another one, take people in Russia. I think that Europe pays and America pays very, very few attention to the destiny of small nations of Russia. This is 19%, at least 19% of population of Russian Federation, which isn't federation anymore. This is a centralized empire, and they are oppressed, and we do too few to help them to be free. And again, I would like to remind about the destiny of small European nation, just something like 1 million people, which is Crimean Tatars or Kirimli, which twice were destroyed in this century, in 1944 by Stalin, and now again they are deported, killed, and deprived of their religion and language. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. And those are like, tend to be bioregions as well. Just a couple of comments to your reflection there. So I have the unusual experience that when my first book was published, the Russians decided to translate it into Russian. So I've had experience of working in Russia for the past 6 years or so, 6 to 8 years. And if I only had the broadcast media to know about the cities of Russia, I would agree with you that the Federation or the federal government has basically made cities much less operable or complex. However, there is a huge bottom-up movement in Russia. And I have met those people personally and keep in contact with them on a regular basis. And I know that Russia is as full of living people who want to make their communities and cities alive as any other nation. The struggle with the power is something the whole world is watching. How is it possible for those people who are working bottom up to allow for their whole intentions and aspirations to survive? Some of them are creating what I would call an international third side because there is a Russian diaspora. So IEC attracts thousands of people to the conference every year, but I do know that the Russians held a 3-month webinar last summer. I believe it was the Living Cities group, and they had 50,000 people by the time it was finished from the Russian diaspora who want the same kinds of peace and conditions that support life that we're talking about here. So this is one of the challenges I see in the groups that I'm working with, something like the Alternative Planet A, which used to be called Alternative UK. Some of you know Indra Adnan's work. She spoke last year at the conference. And the idea of having citizen action network seems to be very something that happens in only democratic countries, so-called democratic countries, because all of our democracies are also being severely challenged at this stage of our species. And it looks like, to me, that the whole self-organizing capacity of citizen action networks and individuals cannot be discounted. In fact, Indra and I were having a conversation the other day because we're doing a ULab, looking at how can a community action network that holds all the community action networks, is there any technology, is there any way that we can connect them all? And I thought about the way that I work with Meshworks. And so Meshworks for me is not just a path of increasing complexity, but it's actually the condition where 2 operating systems are happening in parallel. I think this happens in our own brain. That's where the idea of Meshworks comes from. And that is, there's this ordering system. So we're pointing a lot to the ordering system. And the ordering system can become more complex in time, or it can be down complexified so that it can contract into lower levels of complexity. But at the same time to the ordering system, there is a self-organizing system that is constantly going on. In our brains, it's where all those synapses are firing without any pattern. And we know that in the brain, that when enough of the firings have happened in a recurring pattern, the brain goes, yes, I'm going to lock that in. That is a pattern I will keep and build on. And I think that the self-organizing capacities in citizen action networks, in CANs, in transition towns, in global eco-village networks, wherever people want to express themselves with their own agency, is actually very critical at this time, because I think it's going to influence the whole system. And that what people sort of long for expressing on their own, they may not realize that that too is power. And it is power that can actually influence whole systems. One of the reasons that I focus on cities is because it has a boundary, generally speaking, that this can actually play itself out in as a living system. And so I think that if we are going to imagine something like a third side, that is all the voices of community coming around and being able to hold disagreements. And the first thing that they would have to do is stop the conflict before anything was solved. They're going to have to listen to a lot of stories, not just about the collective, not just about individual experiences of being victimized, but also individual experiences of aliveness. When I work with cities, I often will go in and ask, first of all, tell me about a time that you felt really alive in this place. And it is always heartwarming and compassionate circle expanding to listen to those stories, because I don't think there's any place I've ever been where there hasn't been some examples of aliveness. And then we can look at what makes that aliveness. So I feel like looking at peace, to separate it and simply say it's the opposite of war, is to miss the capacities that are inbuilt in peace that we can notice through the integral maps, that show us there are huge capacities and intelligences in our natural human system. I would like to say that maybe we can bring this session to a landing place by invoking the surprise I heard when James Lovelock was being interviewed and he was being assailed by all of the terrible things that humans have done to the planet. And the interviewer said, "I guess you don't have a very good opinion of humans." And he said, "Not at all. I believe humans are Gaia's reflective organ." And I went, "Oh my God, that is a huge calling." So if we have been evolved, which was where I started the conversation, to be Gaia's reflective organ, what are we being called to reflect on today about peace and our capacities, not only to notice what's broken, but that those same capacities can help us heal. And perhaps cities are just waiting for some agentic group to say, let's start a peace room here and use this to experiment with. So I think that I would like to just open one last round, and if I could invite each person to just say a word or a phrase about what are you taking away today. And I see Lyda has her hand up, so we'll start with Lyda. And Lyda, you can call the next person.
Okay. Well, I like this session. I like your ideas, and I will surely look at it again when it's broadcasted. But at the same time, I'm struggling with a kind of let's see. I have the same values as you, I think. But I also realize somehow that there's also a big judgment about war and dread and violence. So I took this also for me as a sign to inquire my own dread. And I discovered that I'm not very, I don't have much courage. So I don't know if I would do what the Ukrainians do. Yeah, fight for the country, fight for our values. So I see in myself a kind of not giving enough value to the red part, the red energy and the red power. I don't know what is, so my question is somehow, what is the effect of judging red on the whole system? That's somehow that I'm, okay.
That's a beautiful question. It's a great question. And I think that's also a good example of a takeaway from today's session. I think probably the most powerful takeaway could be a question you're leaving with. Thank you. Anybody else? John.
I'd like to respond immediately to that, because for me, the thing about it's about empowerment, individual empowerment as distinct from top-down power. So the bottom-up emergence, for me, the kind of key to this is empowerment of the individual, so that and dealing with all the issues that we have which prevent us from being empowered to be agentic and to implement everything that you put in that beautifully elegant manifesto.
Thank you, John. Anyone else have a question or a comment you're leaving with?
Well, Marilyn, thanks a lot for your presentation and the approach itself. You might hear the church bells from the other side of the Rhine, actually, and of Switzerland. So I hope it doesn't disturb. It was a fabulous presentation. I have to dig in further. And the approach itself to really focusing on integral cities, I mean, is the key, because world development is such that people really concentrate more and more on cities. And cities are the growing element, the melting pot of our world. With, in addition, an individualization of so individual households, single households growing. So complexity there is probably the highest. This, as a general comment, what I realized in the last couple of months, reading history of Ukraine and Russia, and also comparing it, for instance, to Swiss history, the Habsburgan development in our country in the 16th and the 17th century. And if I compare the literature of these two centuries, you see enormous similarity. The only thing is that the weapons have changed drastically, and this is this is of big concern. And maybe a personal comment: we in our family, we have three. My godchild, actually, she's a swimmer, and she has three Ukraine persons in her household, also swimmers. A mother, a 16-year-old boy, and a 6-year-old boy, and it works fabulous in their household. But day-to-day communication with the Ukraine and with the father being in the Ukraine and not knowing what is going to happen is just enormous. And you could cry whenever you hear that.
Yes, thank you, Rita. Thank you for that. And I think that we probably should bring this to a close. Bibi, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say that Gillian raised her hand. Maybe she wants to say a sentence or two. We have not much time, but I would love to hear somebody's voice whose camera was switched off all this time, so it seemed important.
Oh, thank you, and I didn't notice. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm propped up in bed. I'm not feeling well, so I was shy to turn on the camera in this situation. But I really appreciated the maps, Marilyn. I'm Canadian, and I've known of you before, and so I've been down the rabbit hole doing research while we're talking. And the one piece I thought to comment on is the Manifesto of Peace, where you have these action words, or they're not necessarily completely action, but of protect, honor, defend, respect, promote, accept, facilitate, and value. And I was thinking about the agency and thinking across boundaries from self to other, from the 4 different quadrants, from past, present, and future. I was thinking of these various matrices of how to kind of understand or have a pattern language of how maybe one could assess these types of terms. So it's not something that's resolved. I just wanted to share that was activated in me. And just now, as I'm feeling into it, the infinite symbol came. And there's something I think in this meta or super meta framing of peace, of just being with the human experience. And it's very easy to get pulled into the drama, especially when it's so graphic. And how is there a holding? So I guess for me, part of peace is this larger meta or super meta holding of the human experience. And how can we be support, like through the integral lens, to help people with various ways of approaching. And I'm still not clear about the four. I had a question right early on about the four roles in the hive. I have researched it, but I would have loved to have heard it from, and the +1 is still a bit elusive. Maybe I was distracted when you were first introducing that, but I've learned to practice outing my vulnerabilities and trust that they're in service of us all. Thank you very much, especially as a Canadian elder on the world stage as a steward to this. You're an inspiration to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jillian. I really appreciate that. And I know there's many conversations I'd love to pursue. So I put my email in the chat, and anybody who would like to pursue any further with me, I'd be delighted to, especially looking at these peace rooms is something our Living Cities Earth will do. And also thank you, Bibi, for putting in the chat as well a bunch of links to both the blogs that I've written about this topic, and also the link to the Islands of Calm meditation for cities, which I do on a monthly basis. And the next one is Saturday. So anybody who'd like to join me there would be most welcome. So I'd like to thank everyone for your participation, contribution, and ongoing acting, I think, today as a third side for this idea of peace and a peace room and recovering cities through rooms of peace. Thank you, Bibi, so much for holding the space and creating it for us in the first place and helping me through all the different 4 quadrants of this session. Thank you so much.